Well, Charles, thank you very much for coming round to talk about the Assisted Suicide Bill and the Parliament Act, because last week Lord Faulkner said that if peers carried on filibustering, he would use the Parliament Act. And you stood up and said, this is wrong, it's not filibustering, and he shouldn't be threatening the House.
Of course, I would defend to the death the noble and learned Lord Faulkner's right to appear on the Today programme. But I do think that what he said there made it very difficult for the proceedings that are about to ensue, because he said that he threatened, though I don't think it's in his power, he threatened the Parliament Act, he threatened us with the Parliament Act, but more particularly he said that what was going on in all these proceedings was just a filibuster. And it's not just that that is quite untrue, my lords, as you will witness through these many, many hours of detailed debate, which keeps very carefully to the specific points. But it seems to me that what the noble and learned Lord said on the Today programme prejudices what we're about to do in the next 6 or 7 days.
Does he have the power to use the Parliament Act?
He personally certainly does not have the power to use the Parliament Act. I mean, he has no power in that respect at all. He may possibly have some influence with the government. But the government keeps saying that it's neutral on the subject. So it'd be very strange if it wished to invoke the Parliament Act on such a subject. And particularly strange because it's a conscience bill and it's accepted on all sides that it should be. And the Parliament Act is invoked when the will of the government is being defied by the House of Lords. And this is explicitly not the will of the government. So I really don't see how that gets going. I'd also say that I think one needs to see this as a threat and an expression of frustration, because it wasn't a filibuster, it's not a filibuster, and the more one studies this bill, which is what I and others have been doing in committee, the more you see how valuable the Committee of the Whole House is, because there are so many issues that arise because of assisted suicide. I think a lot of its supporters, many of whom have very good motives, simply are not aware of this. But actually it affects the whole constitution of the National Health Service. It affects how judges behave, how doctors behave, the rights of families in relation to it, which at present there would be none. The prognosis of 6 months, so many things. Whether can prisoners vote? Can prisoners have assisted suicide? Can a pregnant woman have assisted suicide? And if she does, is her fetus destroyed? And all these things have to be, it's actually very valuable that we go through this.
And there is a question, I suppose, with the Parliament Act, in that in the black letter of the law, it can be used regardless of the type of public act that comes from the House of Commons and House of Lords. Mm-hmm. But the convention is that the House of Lords would not be overruled on anything that wasn't the commitment of the elected government. Is that your understanding of the mix between the law and the convention?
That is my understanding. And the further point about the convention, which relates to this, is that the only reason that the Parliament Act ought to be invoked is if the House of Lords persistently rejects what the elected government put in its programme. So rather than sort of a law that you suddenly invent and that you want to impose, this is something that you flagged up as yours as a future government in the manifesto. And then the Lords would be morally obliged, though not, I think, legally obliged, to give in eventually.
And the Salisbury-Addison Convention has developed, hasn't it? That from the 1940s, from after the 1945 Labour landslide, Lord Salisbury stood up and said that the House of Lords would not oppose manifesto commitments at second and third reading. Now the House of Lords generally passes any government bill from the government of the day because it feels that the government has a mandate.
It would certainly want to do so if it could. I mean, it's right that it doesn't have, that it's not absolutely forced to do that, but it's obviously sensible that the elected House can ultimately get its way in normal circumstances.
But that a private member's bill, confusingly, a private member's bill is a public bill.
Yes, a public bill, but it's not a government.
But it's not a government bill.
And it's not even, in this case, given government time.
is a very different beast from
Yeah.
a bill proposed by the government, which has that mandate, that authority behind it.
Yes.
This is just something that an MP thought was a good idea and managed to get through the House of Commons.
Yes, but unfortunately it isn't only that, because what's also the case is that Labour has a sort of underlying sympathy for it, which means that it's not a level playing field. And also that there's a very strong and well-funded assisted suicide lobby, which is always pushing for this and keeps on bringing up these bills. And while, of course, I agree that this is a very important issue which needs to be heard, there's something strange about the way bill after bill after bill comes up over the years about this. And they never seem, they're almost polemical in their construction. And they never seem to be properly grounded in law and in all the ramifications. But they keep coming back, and Labour is susceptible to this. So I feel that it's pressure group power more than it is proper legislative discussion.
And that's why you get to the bill that came to the House of Lords that is broadly accepted by its supporters not to be a well-constructed bill in need of amendment in the Lords, which is what the Lords normally does. And this seems to me why the Parliament Act is an idle threat, because the Parliament Act requires the bill as it left the Commons to be passed a second time. But everyone accepts that was actually a poor quality bill.
Yes, exactly. So all it can do is pass an unamended bill. And that really would be quite ridiculous in view of everything that's gone on. That's correct.
And therefore the Parliament Act threat is it's being made by somebody who doesn't have the authority to do it. It's made on a text of a bill that wouldn't actually work. It's just an attempt to bully.
I think it is an expression of frustration, because Lord Faulkner should have realised before he took this bill through, and after all, he's very experienced in all of this, and it's a subject on which he feels very strongly. He should have realised that these are genuine, complicated ramifications which need to be dealt with. I think there's another point, though, which is that one shouldn't see the Parliament Act threat about assisted dying, as it's wrongly called, in isolation. There's also a certain amount of bullying of the House of Lords going on more generally at this point. And of course, that suddenly becomes stronger, really displacement activity because of the Mandelson affair. So this week, Labour have been quite desperate. We should all be talking about whether or not the House of Lords can expel Lord Mandelson rather than its relationship with Lord Mandelson.
And this seems to me to be quite important, because you talk about bullying. Actually, the whole New Labour thing, the whole Mandelson approach was bullying. You must have seen this when you were editing the Daily Telegraph, that Mandelson tried to get editors to fire journalists who wrote stories that he didn't like. There's a bullying ethos behind New Labour. Do you think this has affected the whole of the approach of the Labour Party? And Lord Faulkner, of course, intimately involved with New Labour.
Yes, so I have to say, I can understand why New Labour did have a bullying approach, because they were determined to get on top of the problems they'd always had with the media. And they did organise it in a much more professional way than Labour ever had in the past, and they therefore wanted to sort of control the agenda. And while I didn't necessarily like that, particularly some of what was on the agenda, I understood that. And also, to be fair to Mandelson, though he was very manipulative, he was also helpful to the media in the sense that he did want to explain things. He's always been someone who is, we would see as journalists, as a good contact, because for whatever often Machiavellian reason, he quite often wants to talk to you and engage with the whole subject. But I think broadly you're right that the sort of Mandelson, Campbell, Blair setup, probably necessary from their point of view, certainly effective, but it also produced a tendency to ignore Parliament and treat politics as a sort of carefully controlled media entity, and disrespect Parliament. And I think that's where we are now. And the difference between then and now is that then they were good at it and now they're bad at it.
And the disrespecting Parliament comes in with the accusation of filibustering. A lot of time is being spent in the House of Lords. There are 1,000 amendments, I think, that have been put down.
Not unprecedented, by the way. I think there are more.
That's what I wanted to ask.
Yeah, I think there are more amendments. Forgive me, I haven't got the title quite right, but the Police and Criminal Justice Bill that's going through now, I think, has more. So there's a lot. But, I sat through almost all the days. I think I had to be absent for one, and it's all material stuff. These are not silly amendments. Nobody's been sort of burbling on, or at least not no more than the Lord's ever does. And these are questions that need answering. And Lord Falconer, though courteous in the debate, sort of sucks in the material and then does nothing about it. So there are very few changes he proposes in the light of the debate. And then when he gets up in the middle of it all and says in another place, I don't mean in the House of Commons, but on the Today programme, that he's going to invoke the Parliament Act, he's sort of short-circuiting. He's not really acting in good faith, because what it means is he's just said this. So why is he taking part in this debate if he says it's all a filibuster? In the debate, he's courteous and says, I value this contribution. I will think about it. I will listen. And yet out of doors, he's saying, this is all stuff and nonsense.
And so when you come to the debate itself, in a traditional filibuster, the proponents of a motion go quiet because they just allow the other side to filibuster. Are the pro-assisted suicide people engaging and answering the points that are being made? Are they even accepting some of them?
They're not accepting, they're hardly accepting any of them. Mostly they're not engaging. The only one who talks a lot, and he's right to do so, is Lord Falconer. You do get a bit, the last week we got a bit more engagement from the other side, but I've noticed this. I think this is a sort of, as well as all the politics of it, etc., I think there's a bit of an intellectual problem on the other side, which is that they actually don't understand the arguments that are being made against assisted suicide, because their obsession was with what they call autonomy. And of course, autonomy is a very important principle in human affairs and liberty. But with life and death, it can't be seen in a vacuum. It has to be seen in terms of the situation of the person who's seeking or not seeking assisted suicide, and the effect on families and on health services and public services, and the effect on the wider society of institutionalizing, and the law of institutionalizing, a state role in killing yourself. And they can't get that. They just think somebody wants to die, they must have that right. And then because they do see how complicated this could be and how difficult to argue, they've actually tried to bestow the right to die for a very narrow reason, which is that you've got a prognosis of 6 months to live. And that is a very strange reason. First of all, because it doesn't deal at all with the whole thing about unbearable pain or psychological agony. And indeed, the word pain does not appear in the bill. And also because the prognosis is, you could almost say, fanciful. I mean, I have a friend, for example, was given 6 months to live 11 years ago, and we had a nice farewell lunch, and I see him still. And this is not an uncommon event because of the development of medical treatment and drugs and so on. And so really, they're just inventing a gateway, 6 months terminal illness. And the reason they're doing that, I think, is that once they've got it on the statute book, it'll never go off the statute book. And then what they will do is they will say later on, actually, the 6 month thing isn't very good. It doesn't deal with all the rampant problems. We need more and more and more. And by the way, they'd be right. It isn't any good. But they'd slip it in this way, and then it would expand as it has done in Canada, for example.
Well, logically, if you believe in total autonomy, people should be able to have assisted suicide at any point in their lives and whenever they feel like it, and you shouldn't have any procedures to delay it.
That's correct. And I think it's estimated that if this came in, it would probably be 1% of deaths in Britain per year. But already, I think it's 6% in Canada. So it's become a major part of the landscape, and is intended to do so, I think, because they think it's a good thing. And but it's so big, it's such an important thing. And I think what it keeps coming out, as we all talk about, is that even if you like it, because quite a lot of the people who have doubts about the bill are basically pro-assisted suicide, even if you are disposed to like it, you do realize that what's being proposed is unsafe, and you can't have good laws that are unsafe.
Do you think a lot of people who were pro-assisted suicide in principle at the beginning have changed their minds during the process of debate and have seen that because it's so difficult to get safeguards, actually the principle doesn't work.
You could see that happening in the numeric in the House of Commons debate, where it moved quite sharply. And you do see that in the Lords debate, because there are a good many of us, and I would include myself in this, who were against the idea in the first place. But there are a lot more who have specific anxieties. And I think, interestingly, principle and practice come together here, because after all, principle is not merely a sort of abstract that you pluck out of the air. It's to do with what happens. You have a principle because you're worried about something that actually happens. And often, when you notice something bad that actually happens, you start to think about the principle. So the two interact. And therefore, there's quite a big coalition of people who are seriously concerned about this bill.
And Keir Starmer, when it came in, was politically very strong, and it was believed that it was his wish that this bill would pass. Now, although it's a free vote, although it's a conscience issue, actually the view of the leader of a party who is powerful is very important, isn't it? It influences people who want a job, who want a promotion, who want an honour of some kind. He's not quite so strong now, is he?
No, certainly not. And really not. So that there was this what turned out to be a very brief period when what Keir wants he gets, and they're the sensibles and all this stuff at the beginning. And it really fell apart very quickly originally because of Lord Ali, but on and on it's been going ever since. And so the endorsement of Starmer is not in any way a plus. And actually, I just thought from his point of view, given the sheer difficulty of all of this, he ought to be happy, despite his personal views, if the bill dropped. And if you think of how a prime minister uses their personal views in their political life, I think there's a lesson to be drawn here from Margaret Thatcher, who was always in favour of capital punishment and always voted for it in conscience votes, but was aware that actually there'd be a tremendous amount of trouble if it did come back. And so she never minded, I think it would be fair to say, if the vote for capital punishment lost, but she wished to indicate where she stood. And I think Starmer would be sensible. He has a constituency of people who believe this sort of thing. His view on the subject is clear, but it doesn't necessarily follow that he should be straining to get that view to prevail in Parliament.
Because anything you strain to do uses political capital, and he hasn't.
Yes,
much
and
left.
he has virtually none, and this is a personal conscience issue anyway. So,
and the way it will fall is that if it's not completed by prorogation, then all bills not completed by that point just end.
yes,
Unless there's a specific carryover, but that only applies to government bills, and it's too late for a carryover motion for the assisted suicide bill. The date for prorogation has already been indicated, the new Parliament. So there's not a lot of time for this bill left.
I'm no expert on this, but I think you're right, and I think it is generally believed that it will be very hard to get this bill through now, unless the opposition suddenly folded, which it certainly won't.
And you're sitting on Fridays to do it. How many more Fridays have you got? Do you know?
I think 5 or 6. I think it's 6. Slightly difficult for me because that's when I always write my Telegraph column for Saturday. But there we are. I have to find ways of managing it, because I do really think this is an example of the House of Lords doing valuable work when inadequate legislation has been dumped on us, and we really need, for everybody's sake, to go through it.
And also the House of Lords is in a way much more valid on a bill like this, because the House of Commons did not have a mandate for this. It wasn't part of anybody's manifesto. Very few votes would have been cast for individual MPs on the basis of their views on this subject. Very few would have expressed their views that clearly in their own personal election addresses. So this isn't really the people versus the peers type of debate, is it?
Not at all. Not at all. And even if some people cite, and it's reasonable to do so, opinion polls that show widespread support for assisted suicide. Less so, by the way, if you call it what it is, which is assisted suicide. But it turns out, if you do further polling and questioning, that people have not fully understood what it is. So one of the things they often think, for example, is that it means palliative care, which is, of course, a completely different thing, because assisted dying is all medicine of people with serious illnesses should try to assist dying in the good sense of we're all going to die, and that dying needs to be assisted and its pain needs to be palliated and so on. But when people discover what it means, they have a different view on it, and particularly families, because one of the strange things about this bill is it makes no provision at all for families even to know if their loved one is choosing assisted suicide. So it's perfectly possible under this legislation that the first thing you would know about even your spouse or your son or your father or something, your mother, that they wanted assisted suicide was when they were dead. You would have had no, I mean, of course, they could have told you, they're free to tell you, but there's no legal obligation to share this in any way. And that's extraordinary thought to me, that the National Health Service of Britain would get together under this law and help someone to die, to kill themselves, and only then would the people closest to that person be told.
This seems to me absolutely classic of the socialist state, that they always wish to exclude the family in preference for the organs of the state and the bureaucracy, because there is an intrinsic power struggle between the two. However, I think that is another discussion which I hope we can come back to someday. Charles, thank you very much for
Thank you, Jacob.
joining me. Thank you.
Thank you.